Some stories begin with adventure, others with tragedy. But this one? This one began with a bargain, and a locked box no one thought was worth opening. Hidden away for decades, its secret waited, patiently, for the one man curious enough to break the seal. And when he did, history itself stepped out into the light. Dover, Pennsylvania, a peaceful small town where front porches still creak in the evening breeze and neighbors wave when they drive past. Life here isn't about speed or noise. It's about routine, work, and the quiet comfort of the familiar. Tom Harris, 43, had lived here all his life. Owner of Harris Auto and Repairs, the only mechanic shop within 20 miles, he was known for being honest, dependable, and stubborn enough to fix anything with wheels. But lately, Tom's life had been crowded. His shop was bursting at the seams, old tire stacks leaning against the walls, crates of spare parts shoved in every corner, and carburetors piled so high you couldn't see the shelves behind them. Tom needed space, desperately. It was the first Sunday of September. The morning sun spilled golden light into Tom's modest kitchen. He sat at the table in his flannel shirt, nursing a steaming black coffee, while the smell of pancakes drifted from the stove. Laura, his wife of 15 years, hummed an old country tune as she flipped breakfast. Their 12-year-old son, Caleb, sat at the counter, doodling in his notebook, drawing trucks again like he always did. Tom opened his beat-up laptop. His plan? Search online classifieds and auctions for anything cheap he could use for storage. Old sheds, second-hand trailers, anything. That's when his scrolling stopped. On his screen was a blurry listing photo. A 40-foot steel shipping container, sitting alone in a weed-covered yard. Its paint had once been red, now dulled to a blotchy rust brown. Thick streaks of corrosion bled down its sides, and grass and vines crept up against the base. And then there was the detail that made Tom lean forward. Locked. Original contents unknown. Must arrange pickup. Located at Hanover Freight Depot. Tom's mechanic brain immediately pictured tool storage, but his gut felt something else. That tiny phrase, original contents unknown, in bold black font, it stuck in the back of his mind. The seller's phone number sat just below the listing. When Tom called, the voice on the other end was rough but friendly. Walt Kearns. Walt here. Who's calling? Tom. Name's Tom Harris. I'm looking at your container listing. Walt. Chuckles. That old thing? Been sitting there since before you were born. Belonged to the freight company back when I worked there. They told us leave it locked, don't touch it. So we didn't. Guess they just forgot about it. Tom frowned. Tom. So you've never opened it? Walt. Not once. Lock's older than me now. Could be scraps, could be nothing. But if you bring a truck and win the bid, it's yours, something in Walt's voice carried. A hesitation. Like there was more he wasn't saying. That evening, Tom told Laura about it over dinner. She smirked. Let me guess. You think there's treasure in there? Tom shrugged. Probably not. But wouldn't you want to know? What? If it's worth something? Caleb's eyes lit up. Dad, what if it's like gold bars or a tank? Tom laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, kid. But inside, his curiosity was growing. The online auction lasted 48 hours. Tom hovered over his laptop like a hawk. The price stayed low. First $350, then $390. Finally, with a last-second bid, he secured it for $412 total. Tom had no idea that those $412 were about to buy him a direct ticket into a part of history the world thought was long buried. Most people, when they see rust, they think decay, an ending. But sometimes, rust is just the mask history wears, waiting for the right hands to pull it away. Tom Harris was about to find out what happens when you take that mask off and look history in the eye. Friday morning, arrived cold and gray. Tom Harris backed the flatbed truck down the narrow gravel road leading to the abandoned Hanover Freight Depot, a place that time forgot. The yard was a ghost of its former self, cracked concrete, bleeding grass and weeds, and empty railroad tracks stretching toward a foggy horizon. The container waited there, just like in the photos, a rusty, hulking beast, silent and still. Its paint almost invisible beneath decades of corrosion and nature's relentless grip. Tom stepped out of the truck, boots crunching gravel. The air smelled of damp earth and old metal. He felt a chill, partly from the morning cold, partly from an unshakable feeling, like he'd walked into a doorway between past and present. The sun struggled through thick clouds, casting long shadows across the container's weathered steel sides streaked with peeling paint. Tom ran his fingers across a faded stencil, U.S. Army property, barely legible beneath the rust. The lock, old, pitted, and coated in layers of orange rust, hung heavy on the thick steel clasp. He reached for his toolbox and pulled out an angle grinder, gloves, and a rusted crowbar. The first sparks flew as the grinder bit into the padlock. Metal screamed under the pressure, sending tiny orange glimmers into the cool air. But the lock's stubborn resistance mirrored the mystery inside, unyielding, as if guarding its secrets fiercely. Minutes passed like hours. Sweat ran down Tom's forehead as he worked the grinder. The noise echoed against the empty freight yard, bouncing off crumbling warehouses, stirring decades of dust. He thought he heard faint creaks, whispers of the hidden past waiting within. Those steel walls. The lock cracked, but the hinges groaned and wouldn't release the doors. The container's steel frame had fused through rust, warping its shape. Tom switched gears, grabbing the crowbar, wedging it into the gap. He planted his foot firmly and pushed. Wood from the door framing splintered under the pressure. Another sound, scraping metal against metal, filled the cold air. His breath came in ragged gasps. This was no ordinary storage container. It was a fortress, one refusing to give up its treasure easily. As the door creaked inch by inch, a stale, mixing scent spilled out. Part machine oil, part damp fabric, and faint hints of something. Metallic and old. Tom paused and inhaled deeply. It was thick and heavy, like frozen time finally breathing again. A chill shot down his spine. This wasn't just junk. This was history preserved in a cocoon of rust and dust. With a final heave, the second door swung open with a long, tortured yell of twisting steel. From the container's dark, cavernous interior, Tom's flashlight beam cut through years of shadow. Stacks of wooden crates lay arranged with eerie precision, some wrapped in tattered canvas, marked with military insignia. A single folded piece of paper fluttered down from the top crate, dancing in the weak morning light before settling at Tom's boots. Something whispered. This was only the beginning. Tom stepped back, heart pounding, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of questions. What had been hidden all this time? Why had no one dared open it? Far from the comfort of his busy garage, in this abandoned yard, Tom was no longer just a mechanic. He had become a guardian of a secret centuries in the making, caught between yesterday's shadows and today's harsh light. Tom stood on the threshold between past and present, flashlight cutting through shadows that had held their breath for generations. Every heartbeat pounded louder than the last as he reached for the first crate, the unknown waiting silently. Beneath decades of dust and rust, his hands trembled slightly as he lifted the worn metal latch. The lid creaked open with a groan that echoed the container's long history. Inside lay rows of M1 Garand rifles, wrapped carefully in yellowed wax paper, each tagged meticulously. Tom's voice caught in his throat. These were not just old guns. They were artifacts of a brutal war fought across oceans and continents. The crates also held sealed tins of ammunition, the metal still cold and untouched. He gingerly lifted a rifle, feeling the heavy wood stock beneath worn gloves. The stamp. On the barrel read, Springfield Armory, 1943. "I'm holding history," Tom whispered. Next was a crate marked Signal Corps. Inside was a massive field radio set, its dials coated in layers of dust but still intact. Leather straps held the radio firmly in place alongside a brittle headset and folded paper manuals. Amongst these was an envelope stamped Confidential, sealed tight against time itself. Tom's curiosity flared. What codes had been sent through this forgotten machine? What secrets had it carried on the winds of war? The smallest crate caught Tom's eye next, its wood cracked, its weathered surface carrying faint initials. HW inside was a leather-bound journal, surprisingly well preserved. Opening the delicate pages revealed neat cursive handwriting, each entry a chilling account of life on the front lines. The author was Captain Henry Wallace, a U.S. intelligence officer deeply involved in covert operations during the war. His journal detailed clandestine missions, coded messages, and sketches of key locations, including a map of Normandy dated days before D-Day. Tom ran his fingers over the page, imagining the man behind the pen. It was as if Wallace had spoken directly through time, entrusting Tom with his secret. Tucked away at the back was the smallest, most fortified crate, a steel-reinforced box with a broken latch. Tom paused before opening it, a weight pressing on his chest. With breath held, he pried it open slowly. Inside, nestled in straw padding, were stacks of gold bars. Each bar was stamped with an unmistakable insignia, the Nazi eagle and swastika, alongside the legend Reichsbank, 1943. Tom staggered backward. This was no ordinary find. This was a fortune worth millions. Tom's mind raced. These crates told a story of war, sacrifice, and the hidden movements of an era long past. How had such valuables disappeared into the depths of history? Why had no one uncovered this secret before? He was witnessing a treasure not just of metal and paper, but of stories, lives lived and lost. He reached for his phone. This discovery was bigger than him. Within hours, experts and historians would be pulled into the mystery. But that raw moment, alone with these relics, was something Tom would never forget. Not all treasures shine with gold alone. Some whisper. Through the pages of a diary, the wood of a rifle, the crackle of a forgotten radio. In this rusty container, Tom had cracked open decades of silence, and the world was about to listen. Tom Harris thought the hardest part was behind him, opening the doors, but it turned out the real storm was just beginning. Tom stood at the garage later that evening, the diary of Captain Henry Wallace open on his workbench. Gold bars lay, locked in a side cabinet, rifles carefully arranged on a tarp, the weight of it all pressed on him. He wasn't a museum. He wasn't an arms collector, so he picked up the phone and called Deputy Mark Ellison, an old friend in the county sheriff's office. Tom. Mark, you're going to want to see this, and bring someone who knows their history. Deputy. How big are we talking, Tom? Tom. Bigger than both of us, my friend, way bigger. Within 2 hours, 2 sheriff's SUVs rolled up his gravel driveway. Blue and red lights danced in the fading twilight. Deputy Ellison stepped out first, hands in pockets, skeptical. But the moment Tom led him into the garage and pulled back the tarp, the deputy's jaw went slack. Deputy Ellison. Holy. Tom. Do you know what you've got here? Tom. Not exactly. That's why I called you. The deputy made a quick call to the State Historical Preservation Office. By morning, a team of 2 military historians and a representative from the Smithsonian were on their way. Dr. Rebecca Moore, WWII historian from the Smithsonian, was the first to enter. She'd flown in overnight from Washington, D.C., gloved hands, careful steps. She examined each artifact like she was flipping through a priceless chapter of a book pulled straight from 1944. Her verdict was stunning. The rifles were in near-pristine condition and matching serial numbers from weapons issued to units in France. The radio was one of the very last models used for encrypted transmissions in Europe. Captain Wallace's diary wasn't just a soldier's musings. It was a covert log of asset seizures from retreating Nazi forces. Dr. Moore's eyes lingered on the gold bars. These matched the descriptions of missing Reichsbank reserves presumed lost during transport in the final days of the IRAS war. We thought they were gone forever. It only took one neighbor noticing the official vans and strange visitors for the local paper to get curious. By the afternoon news, a small crowd had gathered near Tom's property. Camera shutters clicked, voices buzzed with rumors, treasure found in a shed, lost Nazi gold here in Pennsylvania. Reporters cornered Tom at the fence. Is it true you found millions in wartime treasure? Tom held up a hand. I'm just doing what's right and making sure it's handled properly. Later that evening, two men in black suits arrived, representatives from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. They explained the 1946 Vesting Act, which required recovered enemy assets to be turned over to the government. Tom braced himself for disappointment, thinking he'd lose it all. But after reviewing his cooperation, they offered him something unexpected. An official finder's reward worth hundreds of thousands, plus permanent credit on any public museum display featuring his discovery. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Captain Wallace's handwriting, the rifles stacked in their crates, and those gleaming bars of gold. He realized this wasn't just about money or publicity. It was about standing in the middle of history, holding pieces of lives lived long before him. Tom Harris had found more than treasure. He'd uncovered a missing chapter of the world's greatest conflict, and soon the rest of the world would know it too. Months had passed since Tom Harris pried open a door rusted shut for more than half a century. The frenzy of reporters, historians, and government officials had faded, but the discovery itself had found a new home. On a crisp spring afternoon, Tom and his family stood inside the Smithsonian's World War II gallery in Washington, D.C. A glass case stood before them, lit perfectly. Inside lay one M1 Garand rifle, the leather-bound diary of Captain Henry Wallace, and a headset from the battered field radio. A gold bar gleamed softly under the lights. A bronze plaque read, "Recovered in Pennsylvania, 2025, donated by Tom Harris, preserving the legacy of WWII." Back in Dover, Tom's quiet garage business saw new faces every week. Some came for oil changes. Others came just to meet the man who found the container. Folks at the diner would still nudge each other when Tom walked in, whispering about how one of their own had uncovered history. Laura often caught Tom staring at the framed photo of the container on his garage wall. Caleb, now obsessed with WWII history, spent hours reading about Captain Wallace's missions. One evening, Caleb asked, "Dad, do you ever wish you'd kept the gold?" Tom smiled, shaking his head. "Son, some things are worth more than money. We gave those stories back to the world, and that's richer than any bank account." On a solo visit to the museum months later, Tom sat on a bench across from the exhibit. He watched strangers walk up, lean in toward the diary, and read the delicate handwriting. He imagined Captain Wallace's relief, that his missions were being remembered, his voice heard again. In that quiet moment, Tom realized something. The container had been locked not just to protect what was inside, but maybe to wait for someone who would value it enough to share it. Some doors are locked to keep people out, others to keep time in, and when the right person turns the key, even if it takes decades, the past steps forward, carrying its lessons into the present. For Tom Harris, One rusty shipping container didn't just hold history, it changed his story forever. The lock was gone. The hinges had given way. But standing there, Tom felt the kind of hesitation you get when every instinct tells you the next step will change everything. With a final push, the heavy door yawned open all the way. The dim daylight spilled inside, cutting narrow stripes across decades of dust. Tom hesitated at the doorway. The interior seemed bigger than he'd expected, a cavern of shadows with a smell so strong he could almost taste it. Machine oil, damp canvas, and something cold, metallic, as if the air itself still carried the war. Each step onto the groaning metal floor echoed around him. The beam of his flashlight panned across wooden crates stacked like soldiers at attention, perfectly aligned in neat rows, despite 60 years of neglect. Some crates had stenciled words barely visible. U.S. Army, property, 1944, others bore. Faded symbols and numeric codes, no doubt meaningless to anyone except the people who had packed them. He rested a hand on the nearest crate. The wood was dry and splintery, edges fortified with rust-colored steel brackets. Where his fingers pressed, a print was left in the dust, the first human touch since the day it was sealed. Tom's breath caught when his light fell upon a corner covered with a faded military blanket, the kind issued during WWII. Underneath was a shape, long and rectangular, its outline too precise to be random. The stillness inside was unnerving. Not even the scrape of rats or the settling of crates, only Tom's own breathing. It felt unnatural, as though the container itself was watching. The flashlight beam landed on an object nailed to the inside wall, a small metal placard with a serial number and the words, Harrisburg Ordnance Depot, 1945. Tom turned toward the garage door opening, daylight behind him, and took a steady breath. Whatever was in here, it had crossed from the European battlefields of the 1940s, across an ocean, across decades of storage yards, just to meet him today, and he was ready to find out why. The first crate would tell him the truth, but truths like these, they don't come quietly. The first crate was the size of a trunk. Tom slid his crowbar under the lid and pried gently. The nails screeched as they lifted, the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. Inside lay M1 Garand rifles, each wrapped in yellowed wax paper bound with cotton twine. The barrels were still slick with hardened preservation oil. Small tags dangled from each trigger guard. Springfield Armory, 1943. Property of the U.S. government. Tom carefully set one rifle on the container floor, almost like he was placing a sleeping infant down. They were never meant to be here this long, he whispered. The second crate's markings were clearer. Signal Corps, U.S. Army, 1944. A musty leather smell burst out as he opened it. Nestled in straw padding was a BC-611 portable field radio, its metal body heavy and scuffed from field use. Alongside it, a headset with fraying cables and a bound packet of papers stamped in bold red, confidential. He flicked open the top, sheet. Faded ink revealed lines of random letters and numbers, coded transmissions. Some had handwritten notes in the margins. Received, confirmed, action approved. Small, almost hidden behind larger boxes, the third crate was unmarked except for initials scorched into one side. HW inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked but pages surprisingly intact. The handwriting inside was neat, disciplined. The first line read, March 12, 1944, somewhere in France. As Tom flipped through, the diary unfolded missions in stunning detail. Sabotage runs, hidden supply drops, coded meeting points in farmhouses. The author was confirmed to be Captain Henry Wallace, an intelligence officer entrusted with intercepting and securing valuable enemy assets. On one page, a rough sketch map of Normandy was marked with arrows and numbers. The date at the top chilled Tom, June 5, 1944, the day before D-Day. This one sat at the very back, smaller but heavier than all the rest, reinforced with iron bands. The lock had already corroded to dust. Tom only had to lift the latch. Inside, under thick layers of straw, shapes gleamed faintly in his flashlight beam. Gold bars, stacks of them, each stamped with the Reichsbank 1943 seal and the Nazi eagle and swastika. The weight was staggering, both physically and historically. Several smaller crates lay stacked to the side. Inside them, Tom found bundles of war medals, including Purple Hearts and Bronze Stars, never awarded. A ceremonial dagger with an ivory handle bearing German markings, rolls of untouched military uniforms still smelling faintly of mothballs. Tom stood surrounded by history, by lives, missions, and a fortune that had slept in steel and dust for generations. It wasn't just what these items were worth. It was the fact that they weren't supposed to exist here at all. This container was a frozen moment in time, one that governments, museums, and maybe even old enemies would have wanted very badly to control. The war in Europe was in its final, chaotic months. The Allies were closing in from the west, the Soviet forces from the east. Nazi Germany, desperate, fractured, began moving anything of value away from advancing armies. Gold reserves from the Reichsbank, seized treasures from occupied nations, military equipment. All of it was hastily packed, mislabeled, and sent toward supposedly safe depots. Captain Henry Wallace, U.S. Army Intelligence, was part of an elite recovery unit, known for intercepting these secret shipments. His diary, the one Tom now held, described a mission in March 1945. Intelligence reports a German train headed north loaded with munitions, and possibly Reich. Gold, orders, intercept, secure, and move cargo to Allied-controlled depot. Against scarce time, Wallace and his men seized the train at an abandoned rail yard. Inside, they found both weapons and heavy crates marked with coded bank stamps, proof of Nazi gold. The diary entries after mid-April 1945 turned cryptic, received new orders from higher clearance, cargo not to be shipped to usual location. Redirect to U.S. shipping manifest, container, AX 7F21. The shipment was placed inside a reinforced shipping container, the very same now on Tom's property, and logged for transport back to the United States. But somewhere between the port and the military depots, it disappeared. Historians in Tom's garage pored over Wallace's notes trying to piece together why. One theory. In the chaos of post-war demobilization, the container was mistakenly routed to a civilian freight yard and forgotten. Another. Certain intelligence officials wanted the contents off the books, storing them where only trusted insiders knew. For decades, it sat in Hanover Freight Depot, slowly dissolving into the background noise of industrial decline. Workers passed by it without a glance. Only Walt Kearns remembered it, and even he never tried to open it. Standing in his garage, Tom now realized he wasn't just holding history. He was holding the final missing link in a gold smuggling trail that historians had chased, journalists had written about, and treasure hunters had dreamed of for years, and now the world was going to know. Two black SUVs pulled up to Tom's driveway. Their doors opened in sequence. Out stepped two men and one woman, all in black suits, ID badges flashing gold in the morning light. The leader introduced himself, special. Agent Carter, U.S. Department of the Treasury, Office of Foreign Asset Control. They didn't waste time. Agent Carter. Mr. Harris, we're here in connection to the property you recovered in your shipping container. We'll need to document and secure it for federal review. Tom wasn't surprised. The gold alone was enough to draw government attention. Inside Tom's garage, the agents photographed every item, tagging crates with evidence labels. Carter explained the vesting order of 1946, a post-WWII law stating that enemy property seized during the war remained under U.S. government control, even decades later. According to this law, the Nazi gold and certain classified artifacts technically weren't Tom's to keep. Tom felt his stomach drop. The treasure he'd uncovered was slipping from his hands. Outside, local news stations had set up vans. Reporters called out questions over the fence. Is it true you found millions in gold? Do you think the government will give you anything? Was anything dangerous inside that container? Cameramen jostled for a glimpse. Neighbors leaned against cars, snapping photos on their phones. The quiet life Tom had known was gone. In less than 48 hours, Dover's small-town mechanic had become the man at the center of a national headline. By midday, Dr. Rebecca Moore and her team from the Smithsonian arrived. She pulled Tom aside quietly. Dr. Moore. Tom, the gold may go to the Treasury, but the rifles, radio, the diary, their history. Your discovery could fill major gaps in the WWII timeline. I believe we can negotiate for you to be recognized as the rightful discoverer. For the first time that day, Tom felt a flicker of relief. There was still a way his name could live on with the find. That night, Tom's small farmhouse was filled with officials, historians, and lawyers, all debating around his kitchen table. The Treasury wanted full possession of the gold. The Smithsonian requested permanent display rights for the diary and weapons. Tom just wanted fairness. And for Captain Wallace's story not to be buried in some locked archive. Laura squeezed his hand under the table, reminding him why he had called officials in the first place, to do the right thing. By the next morning, they had a resolution. Gold bars transferred to U.S. Treasury valued at over $4.7 million. Tom to receive a finder's reward in the high six figures. Weapons, radio, and diary, permanently loaned to the Smithsonian. Public exhibit to feature Tom's name as the discoverer. All Captain Wallace's personal effects to be returned to his surviving family, located after archive searches. Tom watched as the gold was loaded into armored trucks. Each bar clinked. Softly, a bittersweet sound. The sound of history leaving his hands. But when he saw the diary and the rifle crated carefully for transport to Washington, he felt a deeper satisfaction. These weren't just valuables. They were voices from the past, and they were going to be heard. Tom arrived at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History on a bright Saturday morning. The air felt charged. A long, ribboned barrier stood before a brand-new glass exhibit, people gathering, cameras ready. On a dais, the curators prepared to unveil the Wallace Collection. As Tom took his seat in the first row, he spotted Caleb and Laura smiling from the audience. His name was on the printed program alongside Captain Henry Wallace's. With polite applause, Dr. Moore stepped up to the microphone. Today we honor not only a decorated intelligence officer of World War II, but also the man who ensured his story saw daylight, Mr. Tom Harris. The curtain drew back. Inside the glass, Captain Wallace's original field jacket, folded neatly beside his diary. The M1 Garand rifle from Crate 1, polished but unaltered. The portable field radio, dials frozen mid-tune. One gleaming gold bar, encased separately, as a symbol of the lost Reichsbank treasure. As the museum lights dimmed for the feature presentation, a narrator read directly from Wallace's diary. March 15, 1945, crossed into German-held territory under cover of darkness. Secured enemy shipment, crates heavier than expected. Visual, slow-mo, close-ups of hands dragging gold ingots out of a rail car. Orders changed, new destination classified. Cargo loaded into secure container AX-7F21. A projection zoomed on Wallace's hand-sketched map of Normandy from June 5th, 1944. Dr. Moore explained to the crowd how his intelligence work, prepping landing routes and marking safe houses, had directly supported D-Day success. Tom watched, as an elderly veteran in the front row wiped a tear, recognizing names scribbled in the margins of the map. For the first time, Wallace's great-granddaughter spoke publicly. For years, our family knew he'd done something important. But, now what? Now the pieces are finally here for us, and the world to see. Tom felt a lump in his throat. This was no longer just his discovery. It now belonged to history, and to every family who had someone in that war. As the crowd explored the exhibit, Tom lingered at the glass case, eyes on the diary. It was open to a page dated April 20th, 1945, the last entry before the container vanished. The final line read, "Mission complete. Future unknown." Tom realized he was the future Wallace never knew. The media eventually moved on, but Tom's life never fully returned to normal. On most days, his garage was still full of cars and tools. But now there was also a steady stream of veterans, history buffs, and curious travelers who came just to shake his hand. Laura said she'd never seen Tom so patient with strangers. Caleb turned into a history enthusiast overnight, reading everything he could about WWII and Captain Wallace. Tom always made time to tell visitors the same thing. What I found wasn't mine to keep. It was mine to protect, until the right people could share it with everyone. Months after the Smithsonian unveiling, Tom returned alone to Washington, D.C. He walked through the wide glass doors, moving through the quiet halls, until he reached the Wallace collection. The museum was nearly empty that morning, just a few early visitors wandering between exhibits. Tom stood in front of the diary's display case. The soft museum lights made the ink glow faintly against the aged paper. His eyes moved to the last entry again. Mission complete. Future unknown. He smiled slightly and whispered, "The future found you, Captain." Standing there, Tom realized the irony. He had gone searching for extra storage space, and instead found something that filled his life with meaning far more than a few more square feet ever could. This wasn't just about gold, not about rifles, radios, or even the diary. It was about connection, bridging the gap between people separated by generations.